Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So it's been 5 years since I made the transition to becoming a software engineer. And so that milestone has me kind of thinking back and reflecting upon the journey and just the things that I've learned. So I wanted to talk about 9 themes from my past 5 years as a software engineer in hopes that it might help you either decide to become a software engineer if you're thinking about it, or just reflect with me if you are also an engineer about a lot of the good and hard things that come with doing this kind of work. I've talked in the past about how I came to the decision to become a developer and my experiences in coding bootcamp and beyond, and I'll link a few of those down below for you if you're interested. Okay, on to the 9 themes. The first is gratitude, and that is what I feel most when I look back on the past 5 years. Objectively, this has gone better than I could have hoped. I remember when I first started coding bootcamp, I was so nervous and stressed because I'd taken out a loan to do the program, and I also had student debt from my undergrad and university, and also a car payment. I wanted to get married soon, and just all these kind of financial pressures were there, as well as the pressures of learning a completely new skill. I didn't have any skills that I could kind of fall back on. Like in college, I could always kind of fall back on writing, but in software engineering, when you're starting from scratch, you really are just kind of floundering, grasping onto anything, and it was tough. It was really tough. And so just thinking back on that and about how desperately I just wanted to get through that program and get any kind of job, I feel just very grateful for how things have gone and for how my career progression has been up to this point. And I think objectively, tech is great to work in as far as jobs go, and you end up learning a lot, and there's all kinds of awesome ancillary benefits aside from just the money, which we'll get into here in a second. But I'm very grateful for everything and how it's all gone. Okay, the second theme is an unwillingness to settle. So on the flip side from all the gratitude I just mentioned, I also have been kind of idealistic with how I've approached things and been pretty unwilling to settle. My first job was very comfortable and I could have just stayed in it. I'd probably still be there. It was in the public sector, so we were incentivized to stay. Basically, the benefits in the public sector typically get better and better and better the longer you stay, all the way up to retirement when you get a pension, which is like pretty unheard of these days. No one really gets pensions anymore, but if you have a public sector job, you may get one. And so basically I was working with tons of people that had kind of been there forever and were just kind of waiting on that retirement and had kind of given up on really being engaged with their work or learning anything new. And so despite the fact that I was getting paid in my starting salary way more than I hoped for, I kept pushing and kept looking for things where I would be challenged, all the way up to switching jobs. And I did that because I realized I would be miserable if I just kind of gave into the complacency. And I think the unwillingness to settle has actually served me really well for the most part. And so I'm not sure if I'd recommend it for everybody. I think there's also something to be said for contentment. But when I look back at the past 5 years and the themes from the jobs I've had, it's been that unwillingness to settle for things that I thought weren't a good fit. My third theme is prioritizing learning. I kind of just alluded to this, but typically when I've been unwilling to settle, it's because I felt I haven't been learning enough on the job. And so I've prioritized learning a lot. And that was the reason I switched from my first job after 10 months to the second job. I feel like I've also done a pretty good job in general of just exposing myself to new opportunities to learn things, whether that is on new projects or new stacks at work or switching jobs like I mentioned. In general, having an emphasis on learning has served me really, really well in the past 5 years. It's almost a necessity, I would say, as a software engineer to have that kind of continuous learning mindset just because things change so often. My fourth theme is problem solving. Coding is nothing but problem solving, and I just feel like daily exposure to having to think rigorously has made me a much better problem solver in all of life, whether I'm encountering logistical difficulties in my personal life, code itself on the job, or really anything else. I feel like I'm just a much better problem solver in general, and that leads into my sixth theme, which is confidence. I've talked before about how learning to code gives you this sense that everything is figure-outable, and that is super true. So that's what I think of most when I think about this theme, confidence. It's just the fact that after years and years of banging my head against the wall, having to Google how to do stuff, not knowing something, and then having to just figure it out, I've just become much more confident, not only about my problem-solving capability, but just my ability to learn and to teach myself in general, and my ability to just figure stuff out. This confidence that you get from being a developer may be the most life-changing element of everything in the past 5 years, And it's definitely the #1 reason I recommend people to learn to code at all, is because it imbues you with this confidence, which is just so important, I think, and really powerful. I wasn't a person before this that really felt equipped to figure things out. If something broke, I would just call someone or kind of give up. But now that I'm a developer, I understand that everything is kind of linked together and it can be figured out. And so it's just changed how I approach life, and I highly recommend that in general. Along with realizing that everything is kind of linked together, like I just mentioned, my 6th theme goes along with what I just mentioned about realizing that everything is kind of chained together, and that is systems. I basically see everything as a system now, and that has been helpful for automations I've created, like in the video I made about how I automated part of my wife's job, all the way up to just streamlining things in my personal life. Seeing things in terms of systems is really, really helpful for a whole lot of things. Whether you just want to be more efficient or you want to build a business, getting a firm handle on how things are linked together is really, really crucial, and you get a really strong sense of that as a developer. On the note of business, my 7th theme is exposure to entrepreneurship. Many developers tend to be really entrepreneurial because we can solve our own problem and we have that confidence I just mentioned. And I'm just not sure that I would be as interested in entrepreneurship or as confident about it if I hadn't become a developer first. So I'm just very grateful to software engineering for kind of giving me that exposure. My 8th theme over the past 5 years has been embracing pain and suffering. And that may sound a little bit dramatic, but I think it's worth mentioning that learning to code and just being a software developer in general is pretty painful. The computer is always telling you that you're wrong. There's a lot of beating your head against the keyboard, of not knowing how to do things and just having to grind it out. And not only doing all those things, but often doing those things under a tight deadline. It's been tough a lot of the time, but I'm grateful for it because it's helped me to push past what I thought my limits were for learning and endurance. And so at the end of the day, I'm grateful for the difficult times as well, and the painful times of learning this craft and also implementing it. The 9th bucket that I think a lot about when I reflect on the last 5 years is the people. I've had exposure to all kinds of great people, from colleagues to people I've met at conferences and speaking at events, all the way up to people I haven't really met but am exposed to on Twitter. Being an engineer has exposed me to just a lot of people and ideas that I wouldn't otherwise have really had exposure to and wouldn't know about. And so that is something that's been great, and I think a lot about that and the people that have inspired me when I think back on the past 5 years. Learning to code and becoming a software engineer isn't for everyone, but if you're curious and you like problem solving, it could be a great fit. I've got tons of other videos on the developer life, so if this at all sounds interesting, then feel free to go and watch those. Thanks so much for watching to the end. If you're still here, you'd probably like the rest of my channel, which revolves around code, self-improvement, and personal finance. So if you're still here, then feel free to subscribe. Regardless, thanks for spending your time with me, and I'll see you in the next one.